Welcome back to another session. I hope you were well. In today's session, I'd like to expand on where I stopped in the prior session, which was themed around the idea of the importance of gratitude in our lives. Just building on from that position, I titled today's session Compared to What? Compared to what? And the reason I thought perhaps it would be useful to address this conversation at this point in time is for one of many reasons. The sessions that I have covered in the past have included strategies, ideas, theories, perhaps explanations, and some working principles that can be applied. Most of the items and ideas and conversations about how to overcome depression, as I have covered it myself, have been, you might say, for some people, um, areas of involvement that may have required more work than they may have needed. So, for example, we talk about the body and the importance of having the right fuel in the tank and eating a certain type of food, and controlling and regulating the amount you expend based on the amount you create. And that requires work. And then we moved on to the mind and emotions and intellect. And that also requires a different form of work. Gratitude, on the other hand, is simple. It's simple but not easy. We choose to make it hard because we are usually in the right focus. Let me start as follows, and I think today's session, as short as it may be, might rub a few people up the wrong way. I offer no apologies in any case, because I want you to look at the message as one that is intended to be of some benefit and some use, rather than tone police. Just take the message as it comes, and recognize that what I am sharing with you is something I had to say to myself. Number one, I believe that you cannot be a grateful person and have gratitude in your heart and be depressed. I genuinely believe that. Now, obviously, I don't think I have to say this, but I have to preface most sessions with the statement, absent clinical depression. In other words, if we exclude cases of clinical depression, which are a minority of most of the depression-related matters we see in today's society in the West, most of the remaining group of people who suffer from said depression or mental health issues or anxiety issues, or a sense of loss for whatever reason, do not have a spirit of gratitude. Now, we started with the physical body, we've moved into the mind and the intellect, and finally I will end with the spiritual aspect to overcoming, but firstly understanding depression and then overcoming it. When I get to the spiritual side, I will talk about gratitude, and so for that reason I won't go into too much details here. But suffice it to say that gratitude is the fruit of the spirit. It's part of the reason why amongst the Christian or the Judeo-Christian virtues that are listed, one of the things we list is humility. And gratitude is a fruit that comes from humility. And humility is simply the purest form of understanding and being aware of what it means to be a human. Recognizing that the spiritual aspect to you that is formless in nature, that is beautiful and is without boundaries, both in intelligence and abilities and capabilities, but is transformed and placed in this journey to experience life in a particular fashion, way, and duration. And therefore, as the spirit you are, recognizing how infinite you are, but recognizing the acceptance to be, you might say, in this adventure of life, must come to the table with a sense of fascination that something so great as you can be placed in something so little as a body and be allowed to journey through this adventure and make of it as you wish. And so, inherent in awareness of the spiritual aspect of an individual is gratitude, is the humility that comes with that. And so, I actually think most people who suffer from depression and who have anxiety-related issues are ungrateful people and show a sense of ingratitude that knows no bounds. Now, I am not suggesting that these people are proudful or have pride. No, I am simply saying that, remember, one of your intellectual faculties is focus. If you were to go out on a sunny day and you were to pick up a magnifying glass and you put a piece of paper underneath the magnifying glass and you position the magnifying glass at a certain angle so that the penetration of the rays from the sun go through the glass and hit the piece of paper. If you hold that position long enough, you would transform incident radiation to a different form of energy, and it would create heat, and that heat will ignite the paper. Why? Because that magnifying glass can take all of the incident radiation and all of the rays from the sun, and it can channel all of that in one direction, one focus, and it will burn through the paper. Not only will it burn through the paper, you can do this on several materials, wood, metals, and the likes. Now, the point is to say, your intellectual faculty, focus, allows you to take an idea and with singularity, stay focused on that idea, excluding everything around you and everything that could be distracting. This is why one of the secrets to success in any venture of life, relationship, marriage, being a father, being a business person, being a businesswoman, requires focus. Most people are rewarded mostly for what they exclude. And indirectly, that means most people are rewarded for what they focus on. And what tends to happen is whatever you focus on, you transfer all that energy towards. Your emotions, therefore, are a result of your focus. Your outcomes are also a result of your focus. Whatever you focus on, you will feel, you will experience. And so people who are depressed, if you take off the scales, take off the packaging slowly, what you find is it comes down to ingratitude. Yes, how the mind works is important, how the body functions is important, but here's the key thing. I have met people who are suffering, you might say physically, and at a level where perhaps one might suggest to be unbearable, either because they were raised poor, or because they were raised in difficult circumstances, or they were raised with horrible, you might say, physical ailments, or perhaps just general handicaps that come from life. And, interestingly, they seem to be also amongst the most grateful people. It's a difficult thing to comprehend, and I have also met and seen those who have been blessed beyond what the ordinary person could expect or wish for, and they're never happy and they're never satiable. Now, what separates these two groups of people? Well, they're both humans. They share more in common by virtue of, you might say, how they're intrinsically made or created, but it's a mindset. One of them is not limited by things that happen to them, and rather than focus on the 9 things that are wrong, they believe that focusing on the one thing that is good is a better use of their time and energy. Perhaps it's also a better use of their resources. Others who have 9 and lack 1 will ignore the 9 and focus on just the 1 to the exclusion of all of the good that they have received. The difference? One is humble and therefore grateful, and the other is arrogant, prideful, and therefore envious, greedy, insatiable, has a level of gluttony which is perhaps um, perhaps for perhaps for whatever reason, apologies for the distraction. Um, and if you were to strip back both people and look at them, you find, well, they're not too dissimilar. They just have a different attitude. One has an attitude whereby whatever they focus on tends to show in their lives. And so, despite the suffering of life, there's a sense and there's an expectation that that they are wonderfully made, and despite the suffering, they believe that this too shall pass. Whereas the others, who have everything, tend to think that a small setback is here to stay. Now, the reason for all of this is just to simply draw your attention to how a lot of our suffering is self-inflicted. And therefore, if we are ungrateful because we lack humility, and we focus on what we lack and what we do not have, or where we are suffering, or what may have happened to us, we multiply through the law of vibration, which starts the whole process of the law of attraction. We multiply what we do not want in our lives. Therefore, gratitude is the antidote for depression, I think. That you can be, let me take a step back. I have heard, and this is something perhaps to be, most people would agree on. It tends to be the case. Now, those who have had the opportunity to travel or be born in less privileged areas, those who were raised in a manner that was perhaps different to what we see in the West these days, would agree that when they travel to parts of Africa and parts of Asia, or parts of, say, Latin America, and they get to places, even places in Europe, that are the poorest, where perhaps the average family lives on less than £1.50 a day. That there's a freedom that comes with such people. Firstly, they're very grateful. They're very happy. They're very optimistic and enthusiastic. Now, one can say that part of such positional psychology could be because they have an inherent belief about something, an intrinsic belief that supersedes any suffering that they might be going through. Something I will deal with when I talk about the importance of belief. Now, that belief might be in Islam. In other words, they're Muslim beliefs. Or it could be in Christianity, their Christian beliefs, or Judaism, or whichever form, Taoism. It could also even be Hinduism. Doesn't matter. But that there is something that they place above themselves. That is the starting point of humility. That there is something greater than you. And there is something that you submit to. And therefore, submission simply means you don't choose the bad. Or you don't choose the good and exclude the bad. Submission simply means you're not trying to cooperate with this high authority that sits above you. You've willingly accepted whatever is given to you. And you accept it without complaint or without murmuring. And one analogy would be back in the day when you had kings. The king's verdict was final. Sometimes the king would have to do something that was against his interest because he or she may have made a promise. But in any case, the subjects accepted their lot because they submitted to the king and to his crown, or to the queen and to her crown. But by submitting, they were simply saying, I acknowledge that I am one. In other words, my integrity remains intact. My words, my deeds, and my actions are one. And therefore, because I had submitted before whatever was proclaimed by the king, I accept his final verdict. And in a similar way, when we travel and we see people who are poor, yes, some of these people have a belief of a transcendental being, a belief that tells them sometimes, that maybe sometimes wrongly, I have to admit, that your pain and your suffering is so that you can enjoy some reward in a different life, in a second life. That's possible. Or your pain and suffering is partly because you've done something wrong. Possible. Or your pain and suffering is because it's been destined. Now, it doesn't matter what ground upon which their beliefs are accepted. The point is that I have come across, and I'm sure many people would have come across, people who are in dire straits and in difficult places, difficult circumstances, have nothing to eat, but they're grateful, they're happy, and they are not depressed. Well, now let me spin it the other way. I've also come across people who are the most ungrateful, despite having an abundance of material things, an abundance of health, an abundance of well-being and success, but they are still unhappy and they are depressed. And I find it to be almost a conundrum. Those who have nothing are expectant of everything in life. And those who have everything are expectant of nothing in life. Why? The first group have gratitude because they are humble. The second group lack gratitude because they lack humility. And they lack the basic quality of what it means to be human, which is humility, to be humble. And so I would simply say, if you're struggling with depression, ask yourself a simple question. What areas in my life am I ungrateful for? Or what part of my life have I shown ingratitude towards? Even more importantly, ask yourself a simple question. What do I do daily by implicit actions or explicit actions that will suggest that I am actually walking in the spirit of ingratitude? The first, to use the word, sin was the sin of ingratitude. A sin simply meaning to miss the mark. The first was ingratitude, not being grateful for what you already have, and then building on that by asking for more. In many ways, I think people do not understand that the saying that this world and this earth is ours. We think that perhaps there's something that we've been excluded from, and we don't know how to ask. In the sessions that I covered previously, I made reference to the fact that you ask with your thoughts. By your thoughts, what you want is created. By your feelings, it is sent to you. By your expectations and actions, you receive them. And so many people find that some of what is lacking in their lives, it's not because they're not thinking positive thoughts. It's because either they have good thoughts, they have the right feelings, but they have no expectation. The law of expectation works. And so in many ways, there are other people who use the law of expectation and the law of creation in the wrong way. They expect negative things and therefore they get negative things. But suffice it to say that Abraham Maslow was onto something when he talks about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the bottom you have your physiological needs, and then you move up to your safety and security needs, and then you move up to love and belonging, self-esteem and self-actualization. I find it perplexing that those in the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and those who are simply focused on how they can meet their physiological needs, food, water, shelter, etc., at the basic level, almost seldom have ingratitude, but more importantly, almost seldom have depression or anxiety, despite not knowing where the food will come from. There's always this sense of the Lord will provide. Tomorrow will be a better day. This is just a passing phase. There's always that connectivity with expectation, where they find the meal for the next day, even if it's just one meal. And I find it stunning that whereby in the West, particularly where we've moved beyond physiological and love and belonging, and we've moved beyond self-esteem, something that was pushed very hard on most of us between the 60s and the 70s, and we've moved into the phase of self-actualization. And rather than be one with the intelligence that exists in the world, to be one with our gods, we find that we're further apart than we've ever been, primarily because we are focused on areas and things that are happening to us. And we think such things are not fair, unjust, unacceptable, and it puts us in a spirit of ingratitude, and therefore we suffer. Let me end today's session as follows. Many a times people would say, well, if your children are not happy, or if they keep showing contempt towards your parent, and if they are difficult to train, and if they're being entitled, a holiday abroad in a poor country would be of great value. One of the reasons for that is not so that the child suffers when they travel. No. What the primary purpose is that taking the child away from their environment, present environment, and allowing them to sit next to someone else who, except for you might say the birthing lottery, the person who is suffering in the poorer country could have been you, or you could have been them. You just won the genetic lottery, to put it that way, or the birthing lottery. But it tends to be the case that when they travel to such poorer places and they see children or adults who are like them but lack much more, but are still happy, it creates a contrast phenomenon, a contrasting experience. And you may have tried this exercise. Get 3 buckets of water. The first bucket, let's call it bucket A, fill up that bucket with cold water, ice water if you want, but let it be cold. The second bucket, which is, let's call it bucket B, fill it up with warm water, just slightly above what might be lukewarm water. Let it be slightly warm. I won't use the word hot, but let it be warm. And then the third bucket, let it just be tap water, just room temperature water, whatever that temperature might be, depending on where you are. Place the first bucket on your left, which is A, and place the second bucket, which is B, on your right. And then place the third bucket, which is the lukewarm, ambient temperature, normal temperature water, in the middle. Put your 2 hands, one into the cold water, ice, and one into the hot water, and leave it there for about 2 or 3 minutes, providing you do not suffer any discomfort. Just leave it there for a while. And then take both of them out at the same time and put them in the third bucket, which is the ambient temperature or the room temperature water, at the same time. And make an observation as to the senses that you feel. First question, when you place your hand in the first bucket, the cold water, what you feel is cold. The hand is cold. Your senses are telling you the hand is cold because the water is cold. When you put your hand on the third, what would have been initially the second bucket, which is the hot bucket on the right, you feel your hand is warm because the water is warm. Interestingly, this is a contrast phenomenon experiment that has been done multiple times and repeated. And what we find is when you take both hands out and you put both hands in the same water, which is the room temperature water, ambient temperature water, what you find is you record different sensations, despite the water being the same. So the water in the middle is the same, but the feeling you get from each of your hands is different. And the reason is simply because you brought this hand from a place where it was cold, and therefore the lens through which the senses are reading its environment will be different. So both hands in the same bucket tell you and you experience different sensations. Same water, different sensations. And this is the point I'm trying to get to, which is that your prior environment, your emotional state, your mental state, whether you are in spirit or out of spirit, can position you in a place psychologically whereby you are ungrateful and you have ingratitude. Or you can be in a place of thankfulness, thanksgiving, and happiness and joyfulness, because perhaps you're just that kind of person, because you choose to focus or you choose to be that kind of person. I'll leave you with the following words, which is, if you want to try something that is not too intrusive, getting the right diet, getting the right fuel in the tank, creating your mental screen room, managing your thoughts and standing guard at the gate of your mind, all require active work. Gratitude is very simple, something you could do without much effort or energy. And here are a few things. We start at night. Why? Because there was nighttime and there was daytime, and night is usually perhaps the best time to sow those seeds of gratitude. Before you go to bed, pull out a piece of paper or a journal and write down 5 things that you were grateful for. And they have to be things that come from the heart. Don't just be trivial. Don't say you're happy for your car, or you're happy for your new television, or you're happy for your new sofa. No, these are objective things, objects. I want you to write things that come from the heart, but things that you are grateful for. You could be grateful to be alive. You could be grateful to have gone out and not have had an accident. Yesterday I was out, and this must have been within a few seconds. There was an accident in front of us, a serious accident, and as I went past in the car, I thought to myself, that could have been me, and that could have been you. No one was killed, but just the experience that both parties had, almost a head-on collision, but a terrible one. And the point being that if you sat down and you counted your blessings, you would find that there are so many things that happen to you on a daily basis that you are not really mindful of, but that you should be mindful of. And there's so many things that happen around you that you should be aware of, but perhaps you're blindsided to it, and therefore you can't see the blessings. So every night before you go to bed, just write down 5 things you are happy and grateful for. Now the second thing is, when you wake up the next morning, review that list. Let it be one of the first things you do. And the reason is you're trying to get yourself in the right resonance, in the right vibration, in the right state or frequency or energy that allows you to attract good things. And if you review that first thing in the morning, you set your intentions for the day, or you even set your intentions for the hour. And just keep that list with you. I don't believe in leaving your lists at home. Take a journal with you. And look at it regularly throughout the day, so you reset your mind. You're moving towards a thought, or you're moving away from one. And so whenever you find that the day is getting harder, review your gratitude journal so that you get yourself back to being centered. It's like your ground zero. Number 2, as the day progresses, identify and look around for problems that you could solve. Now, do not solve the problems. Just make a list of things that you could solve. And when you write those things down, have your mind calculate and create a solution for such issues or problems. Make about a list of 3 or 5, 3 to 5 or more. And then number 3, make a list of about 2 to 3 things that surprised you for that day. Things that perhaps you've learned something. Oh, you never saw that there. Oh, this is quite interesting. You never thought about this. Or that. You're making an observation about what's around you. And if you can, number 4, I'll leave you one final one. Make a list of 1 or 2 people that you would reach out to that day with intention. And that reaching out, don't calculate how the conversation should flow. Don't calculate what you're going to say, what you're going to give them, because that's transactional. Just bring them to your heart and see their faces and imagine you being of service to them in some way. It could be just listening to them. It could be visiting them. It could be sending them love. It might even just be speaking to them over the phone. But just make 1 or 2 people. Now, the key thing is when you do this, I want you to repeat this every day. But with this number 4, I don't want you to have the same 2 people every day. I want you to change that list. And part of the reason for that is we think about loved in a circle: my mother, my father, my brother, my sister, my best friend, and my neighbor. I want you to change it every day so that you can start to see the humanity in other people, and you start to see things that perhaps you've taken for granted. And just do that for a month. And if you come back in a month and say, well, I tried it and it did not work, I stand to be corrected. But I know something for a fact. If you're diligent, another virtue, Christian virtue, if you're diligent in this task, in less than 30 days, if you were suffering from depression, you will find an immense improvement psychologically, physically, mentally, and spiritually. I will be shocked if you haven't actually got rid of your depression. I'm not talking about clinical depression. I'm just talking about the general suffering people have psychologically in the West. And the reason the transformation will be so simple is because you would be resetting yourself back to your spiritual alignment. And most of us have moved away from our spiritual alignment, either because we've become secular, or we've said, well, we don't want to have anything to do with any religion, or we've become quite relativist in our approach, or hedonistic in our belief system, that we're always thinking about pain and pleasure. And if you're not getting pleasure, then definitely your mind moves towards pain, and then we're looking at the worst and the most trivial pain that we might be going through. I hope today's session has been useful.